Okay, we're recording. Okay, welcome to the Nessa and Professor Bloom cooking show. Woo! We're in very different places in the world, of course, but but we're here together in our summertime wonderfulness to turn our sponge. Nessa, do you mind putting your sponge up to the camera so they can see our sponges? This is the sponge. You can see they're very similar. Good job, Nessa. Looks good. So I think in some ways, I'm gonna turn my cooking music off, my Parisian cooking music off. But in some ways, this sponge went a little long inside the fridge because we had to coordinate our schedules and kind of get everybody up to one place. So, but mine's still a little bubbly and certainly looks alive. And I think Nessa's, yours does also. So this part of pulling this together. Oh no, yeah. So this part of pulling it together is to take your sponge. Now, if you use a regular recipe, it will not accommodate for the water and the flour already in here. So that's why we're doing a little bit less than you might see on another recipe, if that makes sense. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have also, if you don't mind, Nessa, two. Yeah, no worries.
I gotta find an extra bowl.
Yeah, I know. So many bowls. Oy. You're all good. I know, so many bowls. It's crazy. Okay, so we're going to do this. You're going to need 2.5 teaspoons of salt, regular old salt. And I'm just going to add that straight to the starter. So while you're getting that, Nessa, I'm just going to put my camera down a smidge. This is fun, Nessa. I'm glad we're together to be helpful. I'm trying to get accustomed to the angle. So while Nessa is doing that, I'm going to pour 2.5 teaspoons of salt straight into the starter. And again, what we're doing here is we're starting our base for the actual dough that you'll be able to cook using your starter that you did yourself out of basically just using flour and some water. Okay, the water I'm using today is not distilled water. This is just regular tap water because we're going to be working kind of quickly now, and I'm a little bit less worried. If you want to keep using your distilled water, then absolutely you should go for it. Okay, so what I'm going to do, and Nessa, you'll be fine. Just keep doing what you got to do. So I put the 2.5 teaspoons of salt in the starter, and I'm going to add. This is like 1.5 cups of flour. Now, the woman who does this on YouTube, hello, the woman who does this on YouTube, she uses a mixer, but I make almost all my bread using my hands because I believe in this idea of adding microbes from your own body into the recipe, which sounds crazy, but it adds a flavoring. I mean, I don't know if it's a flavoring you can discern, but we all know that bread made in different homes tastes different from the same recipe. And part of that is the home environment becoming part of the bread. So that's why I use my hands, but you know, up to individual people. Okay, so I'm gonna start to mix that salt in, Nessa, and you're gonna see it's pretty, woo, it's like really raw Play-Doh. And then I'm gonna start putting some of this flour in here. So I have 1.5 cups of flour to start. And we're gonna add maybe incrementally quarter cups of water, but you'll know you don't need it yet. You'll feel it's way too wet the starter will be too wet to absorb any more water. So just take the bowl it's in, Nessa, that your sponge is in, and work with that bowl. Kind of punch down method, spin around, punch down, spin around. No worries, just keep collecting your stuff, no worries. Punch down, kind of stir around until that first batch of flour is absorbed. You're going to see it's still super goopy. So I'm going to add some more flour into it. And everyone's sponge will be a little different because you all, have had it maybe in your fridge, maybe even a day less than I had it, because this is a 2-day 2-day sponge. So just sort of coax, Nessa, just sort of coax some out of like a cup and a half of flour, just coax in about a 1/4 cup at a time. 1/4 cup of flour at a time. And you can see how I'm just doing like a little punch down and then I wrap it around. And while you're doing this, just sort of enjoy the thoughts that we've been studying in class about. I mean, I can feel, I don't know about you, Nessa, but when you start to do this and it takes a little bit more of a form, you're really going to appreciate the yeast, how alive it is in there still, because you can feel it almost bouncing back. So as Nessa's getting things ready in her kitchen, I'm just going to keep slowly getting all of this in here. As it starts to get a little bit more firm, I always use the webbing test. This is Bloom's webbing test. If you're webbing, then you probably can put a little more flour in before you add water, if that makes sense. So just keep working a little bit at a time, getting the flour into this dough. And that's going to really just take about...
And then,
go ahead.
One more time. You said a cup and a half or just a cup?
Start with like I put a cup and a half inside here. And
okay.
And I'm just using a little like increments at a time to pour in here. And I have no added water yet. I literally just have the dough and the flour. And if you're hand mixing, just kind of plop your hand inside there and work that in. There you go. Now you can start to mess around with your sponge. Good job.
I don't know if everyone else can see my camera, but
all right.
This is my flour.
Uh-huh.
This is my sponge.
All right, so. Nice. Yeah, just we can see your face, but it's good to have my hands in your face. It's like this hybrid human. It's the Nessa Bloom hybrid. And you know, again, I'm doing like my webbing test. Still pretty moist in there, but I'm gonna just add, and as you put more flour in yours, Nessa, when you get to about half your flour is worked in, I'm gonna add a little more water, and that will make it, again, a little bit even more webby, but I think my dough is ready to absorb more water. Now, with the woman who does the recipe that I follow online, she says, oh, I like a super moist sourdough, so I use more water. But if you think about it, there's only so much water your dough can absorb, right? I will add a note here to say to everybody that if you feel like your sponge is a little dead, plastic, low, and didn't rise up a lot, if you're feeling, in other words, sort of like insecure with your sponge, but you know what I want to say immediately is trust the sponge. It's probably going to be fine for you. And I mean, I don't know about Nessa, but I can feel like this kind of dough fighting back a little, like it wants to, you know, rise up even as I'm touching it, which is a really nice way to think about working with your dough. So just kind of keep working. Now I put in about a 1/4 cup of the water, and I'm pretty much back to paste. Now the paste produces a little less webbing. So I'm going to add some flour to build up more webbing. And Nessa, I'd like to say I know exactly how much, but I don't, because everyone's house has more or less moisture. So the humidity where I am is a little low today. So, you know, I might use less water or more water.
It'll be pretty high today.
Yeah. So you probably have a lot of just moisture in the air kind of working into your recipe. So keep working in the flour. And, you know, you can, this is more about just coaxing this sourdough into a mixture to work all this flour and water into the sponge. And again, you had water in the sponge, so, you know, we're going to use just enough to make this So it's, I'll show you the webbing. Now I'm putting in the rest of my 1.5 cups. And to be honest, I might actually even need a little bit more flour, but that's okay because this is a very tactile experience. So here I am mixing in, and again, you can use a mixer, but this is nice. I like working with the dough. I don't know. Do you like the feeling, Nessa, or is it kind of gross?
No, so my family, especially from my mom's side, they all come from Colombia.
Yeah.
So when we used to cook, it's all by hand.
Yeah, right.
So and I still do it. My sister here, bakes and cooks, and we all like to do little goodies here and there. So it's for me, it's easier to do everything by hand than feeling it.
I agree.
And it may take longer, and that's fine.
Right. Yeah.
But I just like that experience because it just reminds me back at just good old times when I used to do this all the time with my mom. Because we would make like pan de bonos and just like make everything out of scratch.
I
my
love
mom
that
actually in the back, she's reading, so.
I love that it brings back your family memories, the use of your hands, which are, of course, genetically given to you through your family anyhow. And we sort of join all our DNA genetics of working with our hands with food in the past. So my dough is becoming a little bit closer to where I think it might need to be. Yours might be a little bit still wet, or you'll have to judge it, Nessa. So I'm actually going to transfer. So I have a pretty good webbing, which means that it's good for me to put on a board. You don't need to, but just for the demo, so people can see a little more. I'm going to put this here. And I was watching this French man make sourdough bread, and he's like, the dough does not need to be, too much flour. It's very greedy, the dough. And I thought it's interesting, like a human element of something like greed would come into using a dough. There's so many emotional and human factors. Like, does the dough feel good? Is it happy for you? I also say, this is a Bloomism. I would say dough always knows when you're anxious. Do you know what I mean? Like, the minute you get anxious, the dough just falls apart. Ugh. So this.
Well, I mean, listen. This is my second batch of yeast. My first one actually died. Yes. So this is as I put it in our discussion. This is Yeasty 2.0. Yeah, I'm really not that original with names, but
that's good.
Yeasty. I just. And it might smell like pickles because I put it in it used to be in a pickle jar. So I tried washing it as best as I could, that jar, but apparently it still smelled like pickles. And I was like, why does my yeast smell like pickles? And I didn't realize, oh yeah, it's because it used to be a pickle jar.
All right. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, pickles are fermented. I wonder if some of the yeah, that's good. You're getting really good. Now, if you feel confident, so when I feel confident with the dough is I might roll it around this board or in this bowl, and it will sort of move as one entity. Does that make sense? Have you put a little water in it yet, Nessa?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. And you feel like, I'm going to show the webbing. My webbing is still a little heavy for me to think it's totally done, but do you see how much less webbing it is? So I'm going to mix it until I have that much webbing, and that's going to be my cue. Okay. Yeah. And what we're doing, of course, is we're building.
This is her fine look right now.
Now that's good. Keep mixing that extra flour in there. It looks awesome, though. So my dough now is starting to get like greedy, like more flour. I will not behave. So I'm not going to give it any more flour than what it has, and I'm going to work this flour into it. I have not added any more water. The sponge is pretty watery. And if you have a board, sometimes it's easier just to see it, but I've also mixed doughs just in bowls. All right, so this I can feel is going to be my friend, this dough. I have a little dough on the board. I saw a French chef, that French man, he would know how to like pull the dough like this, Nessa, and he would just pick up all the dough without adding flour. So I try to think of his imagery. I think he had a bit, oh, well, actually it kind of works. So you're trying to teach this dough to not be too greedy. And it has a really good feeling, actually. It feels light and almost kind of fluffy-ish. And so I'm going to start to maneuver my dough off of this board. Now, this is where you're calling your shots. So you could say, well, is this dough's gluten built up enough? Do I need to keep working with it? I think, there we go. See how I'm not that webby anymore? To me, yeah, that is the point where it's ready to go into do its first rising. So, if you're watching at home later when Nessa and I do this, I'm now going to pull up this dough, which is overflowing my cooking board because it's, growing. And I'm going to put it in and Nessa, if we hang up and you're still working on that, don't worry, but this is a greased bowl. So I throw it in a greased big bowl and I actually turn it once. See how it's one entity? That's kind of what you're going for. Now it's still sticky. That's fine. And I'm going to keep it in this bowl. I'm going to keep my dough in this bowl for about 4 hours. And the reason it's so long is because we grew our own yeast and we have to keep working and encouraging that yeast to still growing. So later this afternoon, I will take this, I'm going to leave it on the counter. I'm going to cover it and leave it on my counter inside just my house, just on the stove, a neutral temperature. And I'm going to just let it go through 4 hours of rising. After that, I'm going to actually clip into the course the King Arthur flour directions for baking it. And they're not hard. I think they're better than the woman's recipe I gave online, because they basically say once you rise it once to kind of put it and shape it to get ready for baking. So you can read that, but there's ways you can slash the dough so it really has that beautiful burst when it opens up. And the trick is not to have the yeast overproofed, which means that the yeast, by the time you put it in the oven, is like, we're done with our service, we're bowing out, we're all dying. And they have nothing left to give. So the trick is to get the proofing, as close to perfect as possible, meaning the yeast still has some carbon dioxide to produce for you to fluff up your bread. And that's really where you will have all kinds of differences. The first time I did this, my bread was like this, I had overly proofed it and it was nothing left to give, or my yeast wasn't robust enough. But the last time I made it, I had last 2 or 3 times, doing the same technique, I had big fluffy loaves of sourdough. So as Nessa is still working with her dough, getting it ready to go into her proofing, I will, first of all, thank Nessa for being here. What a joy. Yes, nice. That is perfect. What a joy it's been to have your company, Nessa. And I'm sure that we wish good blessings to everybody else who's at home trying to get their sourdough started to become bread. And Nessa and I will post our breads maybe later today and just see how they turned out. And I will put the recipe for what you and I and everyone else will follow after this point, Nessa. Does that sound good?
Of course, yeah. I'm really excited, and I'm actually, when we were talking about what was inside my jar with the pickles, I think it might have done some magic. That's what I'm thinking.
It has fermenting. So, it has yeast inside that jar. Pickles undergo fermentation. So I wish I could taste some of that pickly sourdough. I bet that'd be delicious. Okay, so I'm signing off.
Listen, it would be delicious.
I'm signing off Thank you, Nessa. Thank you, everybody. Don't give up. You can do this. We encourage you. And if not, then I hope you enjoyed our cooking show. Bye, Nessa.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.